Your problems with the dies not cutting first time. To be honest, Sandra, I've got exactly the same dies as you. So I have, for me, I've just opened the pack and they've cut absolutely fine for me. If a die doesn't cut, it's very, very, very rarely. In fact, it's only been one in about 10,000 I've found that it's the die. It's usually the pressure in your machine. So if you find a die is quite intricate and isn't cutting well in your machine, you need to put more pressure into your machine. So I would use something like a metal shim or a paper shim to increase the pressure. It's not that a die won't cut because the die's not sharp. If a die doesn't cut, it's because you've not got enough pressure in your machine. So try a shim. Yeah, we're terrible for this as crafters. We think, oh, it must be the die. It's not, invariably, and I've only ever seen one example where it's not. It's actually the machine itself that's not got enough pressure, because over time they lose pressure. So I'm trying to find my metal shim. I haven't had to use it in ages and I've just put it down somewhere. So I have an A5 and an A4 metal shim that I just use on top of the die. So I go paper or card, die, metal shim, then my top plate and cut, and it increases the pressure in your machine. The only thing I would say is, of course, the thinner the paper, the harder it is to cut. The thing is, dies cut not by being sharp, unless they're the deep dish dies from Sizzlings. Dies cut by basically forcing the fibres to separate. Now, if you've got something like a photocopy paper, very thin, there's hardly any fibre in there, so there's nothing to separate. So your ideal weight for die cutting is between about 190 and 300. Your optimum's 240, 250. So that's your optimum weight. But the thinner it is, the harder it is to cut, because there's not enough to go for it to bite into and pull apart, if that makes sense. So it took me ages to find that. I know when people go, oh, I've even tried copy paper. Copy paper is the worst thing ever to cut. If you want to cut that, put 3 or 4 layers together.